Long journey, having a long conversation about anti-Semitism. We're speaking about it, unfortunately, because it's been a conversation that has definitely reemerged, something that I don't believe any one of us growing up in America would have ever believed that this is where we would be at, having a conversation, worrying about our children experiencing, anti-Semitism, bigotry, and it's a definitely not a simple topic. We've spent six. This is a sixth series, so we've spent about three to 4 hours having this conversation, and I still believe, even with everything that we've gone through, from the history to understanding it from a historical perspective, and even touching upon it religiously and spiritually, we're just scratching the surface when we're having this conversation. Can anti-Semitism be eradicated? Which is, we're in the middle of that part of the conversation right now. And that's a great question. Is there anything we can do to stop this unfortunate cycle of violence, of this unfortunate cycle of hatred? We've go back to our own sources and look back at the Torah's explanation of this. And we see how the Torah itself is just filled with stories of individuals who hated Jews. We pointed out that King Nimrod was the first Jew hater. He hated monotheism, and he hated Abraham for bringing monotheistic ideas to the world. Ishmael was the patriarch of the Ishmaelites, and he had a hard time with Yitzchak and Abraham's ideas there as well. Esav, who hated Yaakov, we say it's a halacha that Esav soneh et Yaakov, Esav hates Yaakov and his descendants. These are all difficult ideas to try to understand and comprehend, but no question that we will hopefully walk away with some more clarity as to why this is the reality that we live in. Now, we mentioned also, just to quickly review, Lavan, how Lavan was considered in the Pesach Haggadah as the one who sought to uproot the Jewish people, like Esav. He was considered the archetype of anti-Semitism. We even mentioned Bilam, as the Parshiot came up, was also a prophet for the non-Jews, and who even believes in God yet still hated the Jews. Complicated, to say the least. Okay, so we've mentioned all kinds of answers that were offered by scholars to help explain anti-Semitism and how anti-Semitism works. And we spoke about economic factors, we spoke about the scapegoat, we spoke about ethnic hatred, we spoke about xenophobia, we spoke about resentment, all sorts of resentments that may stand in the way as well. We spoke about religious bigotry, but ultimately, none of these things fully express and help us understand what anti-Semitism is, or how we can get rid of it. So let's talk about it a little differently, okay? Now, there is this idea that aside from the story of Lavan, right? There's a very clear pasuk, right, which says that it's not just one individual who got up to arise and annihilate the Jewish people, but in every single generation, people rise up against us to annihilate us. And God, in His blessed mercy, saves us from their hands. Now, how do we understand that? This is we read this every year. This is from the Haggadah, right? The Haggadah teaches us that anti-Semitism saves us from assimilation. The Haggadah teaches us like this, that God says to Abraham, know that your children are going to be strangers in the land of not their own. They're going to be a stranger in a strange land. And they're going to be enslaved and persecuted for 400 years. And then God says, I'm going to judge the people that enslaved you, your children, and they'll go out with the rechush gadol, great wealth. And now this has enabled us and our forefathers to survive. Now, not just one nation has stood up to destroy us, but in each and every generation they stand and destroys us, and what happens? God saves us. But what does that tell us about the secret of Jewish survival? It's paradoxical. There's a desire to destroy the Jewish people. That's what we're saying. that from our Jewish sources, this concept that there is this deep-rooted spiritual idea that people want to get rid of us. And that force itself is a way of preserving us. When God tells Abraham that his descendants would dwell in exile, he said the word, V'ger haya zarecha. Your seed will be strangers. Right? Now, Jewish national destiny is to dwell among the nations. We're supposed to remain unique, distinct. But according to the Haggadah, right, he says a little bit differently about Yaakov. He says, V'yigar sham. And he sojourned there. Now, Yaakov didn't intend to become rooted in Egypt, but he just wanted to spend some time there. He wanted to be there as a guest. He wanted to find his son and settle with his family. He was, happy to, on some level, to receive the hospitality of Paro, the Egyptians, but it was a temporary solution, right? Yaakov, his sons, were free to become citizens, but it was Yaakov's choice to remain a stranger. Yaakov's goal, Yaakov Avinu, when him and his sons were in Egypt, he wanted his children to remain separate. Right? This is Moshe's blessing to the Jewish people. And the Jewish people will dwell securely, separate, according within the vision of Yaakov. No, so for his part, Yosef insisted that the brothers dwell separately in Goshen. Right? During his lifetime, he did not allow them to leave, and he dealt with the Egyptians, and they lived in harmony. It was perfect. After Yosef's death, we're told that the land was filled with them. This is talking about the Jews, and they were filled with them, those kinds of people. And therefore, what ends up happening is we start seeing that the lines of demarcation were beginning to erode. As the Jews in Egypt were beginning to assimilate, the land was filled with them. So the Midrash tells us that as they spread throughout Egypt, their stated goal was to become as Egyptian as possible. They wanted to assimilate. That's what every single person wants to do. Who doesn't want to become part of the host country they're in? Why would you want to be the other? Everyone wants to fit in. The culture creates the reality that wants us to fit in. This is why Jews have such a hard time being Jewish. Well, how do Jewish values help me when the values you have are completely out of sync with the culture that you're in? And I find that young Jews especially have a hard time with this. Maybe the host culture knows more than the ancient Jews when it comes to building society, etiquette, and so on and so forth. But the response to the Jewish desire to assimilate, Midrash tells us, was a growing hatred by the Egyptians. This process of intermingling resulted in an attempt to adopt non-Jewish customs, and finally a rejection of God's covenant. And that's ultimately what causes the Egyptian anti-Semitism. Now, this is a very deep idea. Now, there's a crucial source from our sages, right, that tells us something very profound. This is from the Yalkut Shimoni. And he says like this, and it says, he quotes a pasuk, "Timaleh haaretz otam," and the land was filled with them. This is what the Yalkut Shimoni says. This was written, my friends, about 1,800 years ago. He says like this, Davar acher, another understanding, that the Jews filled the theaters and the circuses. And immediately, the Egyptians made enactments that the Jews separate from them. And then it says, "Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim," a new king arose them over Egypt. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said, what was he a new king? But rather, he wasn't a new king. He enacted new harsh decrees upon them. Right? This is a very different understanding. In the same vein, we have a Gemara in Sanhedrin that tells us that the desolation of the Jewish people is always due to their refusal to remain separate. It's interesting that the word for holiness in Hebrew, kedusha, means to be separate. So we quote a pasuk which we're going to read. Hopefully we don't read it, and Mashiach comes, and we end all of this in the beginning of the book of Lamentations, the book of Echa Yashva Badad. Okay, so we're quoting this midrash. It says that Rabbi Yochanan said, "I, God, said that Israel should dwell securely according to the vision of Jacob," which means to be separate. Now that they've rejected this, let the city dwell desolate. So this idea from this passage informs us that as a consequence of our rejection of our unique mission, right? The nations of the world have forced them to dwell apart. In this way, Israel is saved from herself. Now, this is also the content of Bilam's prophecy. They are a nation who dwell alone, securely, right? Now, Israel is respected by the world as the bearer of a moral message and a unique mission. But when that moral message and mission is rejected, and to that degree, Israel brings upon herself the contempt of the nations around her. I have a whole theory as to why, but this is straight out in our sources. God endowed various aspects of creation with a distinct purpose and goals. The rejection of Jews rejecting their national personal mission is viewed as the most serious abandonment possibly in the system that God has created. So there's something called divine retribution, and even his retribution has mercy within it, but God guarantees that the ultimate purpose of creation is going to be attained no matter what. So you have a flood event during the times of Noah, you have the generation of the Tower of Babel, you have the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Just as the principle applies to the realm of general human society, it's also true vis-a-vis the mission of the Jewish people. We have a divine responsibility that goes all the way back to the revelation at Sinai. God gave the Jewish people the capacity and obligation to correct humanity. Not only to correct them, but I would say that's not. I think that yes, the ultimate goal is to correct them, but more to teach and demonstrate to them that there's something called human nature and perfection, that they are more of a soul than they are an animal. That ultimately the way we get there is through the belief in one God, and through the refinement of our character, becoming greater individuals. This is how we are able to express the ultimate creation of man, right? As long as we continue to fulfill our unique purpose, God protects us and rewards us. When we as Jews are doing what we are meant to do, and that is being the best version of ourselves, then the world around us changes. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about this transgressions, right, that creates this vulnerability that allows anti-Semitism from other nations. We have this idea of ma'aseh avot siman labanim. So we said earlier, there's halacha that Esav soneh et Yaakov, that Esav, the twin brother of Jacob, hates Jacob, right? So we know that Yaakov divided himself into two camps when he was facing his brother for the first time, fearing this attack, fearing the possible transgression, fearing that he had some vulnerability. He divides up his family into two camps, just in case one gets hit, the other one is going to survive. So now, since Yaakov represents the entirety of the Jewish people, the patriarch represents the entirety of the Jewish people, and his actions have an impact and reverberate throughout the course of the Jewish timeline. And since Esav is the paradigm for the anti-Semitism expressed by other nations, Yaakov is teaching us that our sins, our transgressions, make us vulnerable to anti-Semitism. In addition to Yaakov, we also get this principle from Amalek, right? The Amaleki nation who attacked the Jewish nations right after they crossed the Red Sea. Even though we learned from we said this earlier, that Amalek attacked the Jewish people because they represented God and his value. But Midrash tells us the causative factor that enabled Amalek's attack was a certain shortcoming that the Jews were expressing at that time. So how is it possible for Amalek to challenge the Jewish people at the height of their success? We're talking about miracles. Egypt is wiped out. The sea is split. The Jewish people have everything going right. If you were writing the story, it makes no sense for any nation to go ahead and attack the Jewish people at this point. This is the peak of their strength. They did supernatural things. Their hearts melted. They end up at a place called Rephidim, and then all of a sudden Amalek comes out and attacks them. So now, why is Amalek attacking at that place? So the Midrash tells us that Israel weakened their Torah study or their spiritual development at that place. So we have to understand, what is the direct causality here the slacking off, the weakening of their study would enable this malevolent attack on the Jewish people. So this is the explanation. Now this at least this is the way I understand it, right? When the Jewish people weaken their study, right, that on some level indicates a disrespect for Torah lifestyle, right? It's a slackening. It's a disrespect. It comes from a lack of appreciation for the value, the importance of what it means to develop ourselves. We take this stuff very seriously, and I say this all the time. If we are not involved in a process of development, of growth, if we are not involved in a place where we actually have a vision of what it means to be the best us, and then proactively work on becoming that, we're in trouble. Okay, so that means we're not aligned with our spiritual mission. If there is a insufficient spiritual awareness, if there's an insufficient awareness of the holiness that is involved in our development, and therefore when that happens, the direct causality that is that we're punished by a nation as brazen as Amalek. Who these people do not acknowledge the value of holiness. These people do not acknowledge the value of self-development and purity and so on and so forth. So you have a nation that represents the opposite. If we lose sensitivity, the things that don't have that sensitivity come to remind us, like, hey guys, here it is. Again, I mean, it's almost miraculous that we are living at a time where we are seeing a philosophy in our culture in America today that is absurd. And it makes my job as a rabbi so much easier if I have to explain the values of Judaism, because people have lost their minds, it seems like. You have all these movements that have happened in the last couple of years in this country, which some of them had some really good merit and could have accomplished amazing things. But instead, they brought more misery and harm than good. Right after the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea, okay, God gives the Jewish people 3 comprehensive areas of Torah to study. Mishpatim, which are the social ordinances, the laws of Shabbat, and the Para Aduma. Okay, the name Refidim, right, is interpreted as a contraction of the words Rufu Yadehem. They loosened their hands. They loosened their grip on Torah study. They loosened their grip, and Torah study isn't just sitting there and just reading a book. The ultimate goal of Torah study, when we say that, it means that we're developing ourselves, that we're investing in the idea of learning ideas so we could refine our character, we could refine the world, that we could become greater human beings, we could root out those evil intentions sometimes that we have within us, that we actually get to look at people and see them as being an expression of godliness. Now, there's one other idea that I want to express over here. This is what I think that the Purim story in Megillah tells us something also very deep. So there's based on another Gemara in Megillah. It tells us like this. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that why did the Jews of the generation of the Purim story deserve to be annihilated? What was their sin? Right? So they said, since they enjoyed the banquet at Achashverosh's party, right, where they showed the vessels of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, right? That was the reason why they were punished. Rabbi Shimon says that if that's the reason why the Jews were deserving of annihilation, only the Jews of Shushan should have been punished, right? Why is it that every single Jew worldwide was going to be part of this enactment? So he says that, the answer is that because they bowed down to an idol during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple, right? That was the reason why they were all deserving. But over here, it's a little different. You see, Achashverosh was afraid that the Jews would repent, and he never intended to allow their full annihilation. He just wanted to get rid of those Jews, right? So what are we talking about over here? You could point to a combination of 2 factors over here that cause anti-Semitism. Haman, he comes from Amalek, right? And God, he does not like God. He's someone who is anti-monotheistic morality, and you have a bunch of people who are weakening in their own unique relationship to their mission. And this transgression leads to anti-Semitism. Okay, this is the same anti-Semitism that is expressed by the Babylonian exile, the Roman exile, the nations that destroy the first and second temple. Whereas you might think that these additional examples of, anti-Semitism, right, guides us away from being overly simplistic, right? But the nations were engaged in normal forces of history. They had all kinds of ambition, they wanted conquest. But the Talmud is telling us that there are certain triggers where Jewish national transgressions impact the whole. My shortcomings is an issue for you. And your shortcomings are an issue for me, because we say that we're Kol Yisrael Revim Zelazeh, we're all interconnected. Every Jew's connected. We're like a hive. No matter where we go, no matter what we do, you're important. This is part of my mission. My mission for the last 18 years has been to teach Jews the depth and the beauty of their heritage. Because I believe on a spiritual level, my goal isn't to make anyone religious. My goal is to get people to be proactively working and becoming greater human beings, using Judaism as a way of doing it. How that expresses itself is personal, it's unique. But ultimately, I want the same thing. I want to help people to not lose themselves to decadence. I want people to invest in themselves in a way where they can actually express the best versions of themselves. That's what Judaism is. Now, there is a third type of anti-Semitism, okay, that's in addition to Amalek, Lavan, Esav, and so on and so forth. And that is the Babylonians and the Babylonians and the Romans were among the nations that want to conquer the world. Okay, they confronted the Jewish people, and they conquered the Jewish people on a level of simple historical understanding, right? This type of anti-Semitism, does not require any kind of real analysis, because they just happen to be in a place where people want to conquer. Right? There's no overt reason aside for power, wealth, fame, honor, glory. But even here, there is some kind of an explanation that I think should be required, because on a level of historical explanation, the Babylonians, the Romans, they treated Israel as they would any other nation. And therefore, why were we describing those conquests as anti-Semitism? Right? There are serious theological undertones to these conquests as well. The Chachamim, the rabbis, insisted that the real causation always lay within Israel's misdeeds, and the nation's antagonism to Israel's belief. They didn't like what we believed in. Overt reasons for the causation that brings about this kind of. Sometimes, I get phone calls and they just like buzz at a time. I get 4 or 5 different people at the same exact time. It's interesting. So there's this idea that even though there is conquest, nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything happens for a unique reason. Everything is there because of a cause of something that we've done. It's not just an accident that the Jews are bumping into the Romans and the Babylonians. Even those interactions have a unique mission of some sorts, and they're generally coming from a spiritual place. There's a very, very important book that you should all be familiar with. It's called Nefesh HaChaim. It's written by Reb Chaim Volozhin, who says that the temple walls were destroyed by the Jewish people, not by the Babylonians and not by the Romans. That when the Babylonians and the Romans came to destroy the temple walls, it was like they were already grounding up flour that was already grounded up, meaning it was gone already. So it's our sins, it's our behavior, it's because of all the things we said. So what can we do about eradicating anti-Semitism? I want to finish up the series. We have 5 more minutes. Let's try to figure out if there's anything here we can do together. Now, it's a great question. Maybe one way to escape was through conversion, and this is before the Nazis, and that would have been a way of dealing with it, but that's not really going to happen. Assimilating doesn't work. What is the way? How do we deal with this? Now, I think that the antidote to anti-Semitism, maybe the solution to eradicating anti-Semitism, is related directly to the principle that causes anti-Semitism: hatred or jealousy of God, the Jewish people and the Jewish values, anti-Semitism as a divine tool that ensures that Jews carry out their unique mission and that prevents assimilation, a consequence of our national transgressions. Now, I think the way in which we could overcome these things is by uniting, embrace both the Jewish mission and its core values. If we are able to create a worldwide campaign to stop Jewish, hatred, Jewish transgressions, by allowing Jews to become something more. Jews have to get back to their original task of spreading ethical monotheism. I think that's the only way to do it, right? The only way to do it is to play our role in history. If there is such a thing as a role in history, then the reason why this hatred happens is when we don't play the role. And again, I know you're thinking, because I think it also, you think that, playing the role of Jewish history means like growing side locks and wearing black and white. That's a role, it's not the role. All of us have different roles. Each one of us has a unique way of expressing our own Judaism, our own unique spirituality into this world. If we are all playing our parts, then we're doing the right thing. But we can't play our parts and ignore ethical, moral Judaism. Can't play our parts if we don't see the value in the book itself. This is what we're talking about. Ultimately, that the Torah, its observance, what its story is what we're meant to be doing. And if we're not, it is the only way I see around it, because it's irrational. And therefore, the whole of anti-Semitism is coming from a very, very spiritual place. Okay, and therefore, the only way we can begin to eradicate anti-Semitism is by doubling down on the spiritual mission of what it means to be a Jew. Now, is this realistic? Are we going to get all the Jews to kind of get more involved in their Judaism? I don't think so, unfortunately. And that's fine. I had a rabbi who told me, don't worry about if the Jews assimilate. You just do what you have to do. God has a plan for everybody. It makes me uncomfortable saying those things, because I definitely believe that there is value in every single Jew being to participate in their Judaism, and that each one of us has a unique story to tell. Why would I want them to lose that? But ultimately, I believe that this will happen, express itself by the end of time, during the Messianic era. And that if the Jewish people are actually able to become the best version of themselves, we usher in this realm of the Messianic era, a world where we no longer have doubts, a world where we live in harmony and happiness, a world where we recognize that we are a soul and that there is a God. I don't see us getting out of this loop until we as Jews, as collectively, embrace our mission and work on a program that allows us to grow together. I don't know how we get out of it. And ultimately, the way in which we eradicate anti-Semitism is by becoming more Jewish, right? Who would have thought that the thing that they hate about us is our Judaism, but it's not that they hate our Judaism. It's they hate the fact that we're duplicitous about our Judaism. Are you a Jew? And if you're a Jew, then you're a religious person. If you're a religious person, how can you not be involved in religious, spiritual things? You must be a faker, you must be a liar, you must be a conniver. Therefore, get rid of you. We don't want liars and connivers around us. But if you're someone who is real, that actually doubles down and taps into this deepest parts of yourself, your essence and your being, I'm confident together we will see a world without this kind of hatred. And it's this kind of a world where we could actually show and teach the world the uniqueness of Tzelem Elokim Bara Otam, that God created every man in his image. This is what the founding forefathers of America wanted. This is certainly what Abraham, our patriarch, wanted, to recognize that each of us are a divine spark, and through us focusing in, doubling down on our real core mission, this is how we bring peace into the world. And I believe this is how we end up eradicating all of anti-Semitism. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your participation. This is the end of this unique series. If you have questions, comments, concerns, I'm happy to take them. If I said anything that wasn't clear or anything you want me to go ahead and review, I'm happy to do so. And if not, you could always email me at Reuven at EJSREUVEN at EJSNY.org. I'm happy to respond. Otherwise, wishing you an amazing day. It is Wednesday, so I could wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much, everybody.